Hello and welcome to a CNBC Africa exclusive interview. I'm your host, George Ndirangu. This time we've switched locations, coming to you from Uganda. Now, earlier this year, Uganda's outlook was termed as stable, fueled by high infrastructure, of course, in, among other areas, development of the oil sector, which is expected to bear fruit starting 2020. Now, couple that with open borders to South Sudan at a time when the latter goes through a moment of unrest, we seek to find out the low-hanging fruits, the successes, and tentative or possible challenges that the country could face as they continue on the journey towards being a middle-income economy. To help us break this down, I have the absolute pleasure of hosting His Excellency the President, Yoweri Museveni. Glad to have you speaking to us. Thank you very much for creating time. Of course, the issue that I've just mentioned has been oil, and you've been vocal about this particular topic. Allow us to start on that as we map out the conversation. The IMF and the World Bank are all looking at oil proceeds to drive growth in Uganda in the next couple of years, to the point where we should see at least Uganda's GDP anchor itself to the oil sector. Now, we still have a global issue of the Dutch disease, where issues like oil tend to drive the depreciation of the currency, and of course a lot more when foreign currency starts to come in. What are your thoughts on the pace at which we've embarked on this conversation?
Well, that one is turned upside down. It is not Uganda anchoring itself on the oil. It is the oil anchoring itself on Uganda. Uganda was here before oil, and it will be here after oil. Oil is just a bonus. It is a strategic raw material for energy, and it brings in money, which money we shall use for the bigger economy, which is the renewable economy of Uganda. That is agriculture, industry, services, the human resource development. It's the other way around. This one is just an aid to our economy.
Should we have any concerns on maybe the disruption of the flow of conversations that were had before now, with the energy PS being leaving that particular docket?
PS is a very small player. The PS is just an office manager, but the people who run the country are there. The whole cabinet, myself. PS is just a bureaucrat. How can he stop our plan? He's not the one who made it.
Is there any clarity on maybe why he left the docket, or nothing tied to the bigger picture on where the country was moving?
No, nothing. Just I just wanted to change.
Right. Okay, let's move on to other matters. Of course, we have the issue on the Karuma and the Isimba Dam to boost electricity generation. But outside the border, we have Ethiopia that is continuing to engage in such massive projects as Uganda as well, 2,000 megawatts on that end. What is the balance that we're painting a picture in the region in terms of importation of such issues as electricity and exportation on that end? What conversations are happening on a regional level?
The total potential of hydropower on all the rivers of Africa is 360,000 megawatts. The population of Africa now is 1.3 billion. It will be 2.5 billion in 30 years. Now, if you look at the United States, with only a population of 300 million, they use 1.5 million megawatts. So here you are. The whole potential of the whole of Africa is 360 megawatts for the rivers. So there is, if you are talking about development, there is no way we shall have too much electricity. That electricity of Ethiopia and this one of Uganda here is too small. So when you hear that when you hear somebody saying that there will be energy oversupply, then you should put him in a museum of development. He's not a serious player. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You take a small country like Norway, with only 4 or 5 million people. They generate about 30,000 megawatts. So when you say Ethiopia, how much are they generating now? Just 6,000 or something like that. This is just a joke. That electricity of Ethiopia is too small. What we are doing here is small. We need much more energy than what we are doing now.
All right, now, since we're still tied to issues on water and water generation on that end, allow us to touch a bit on the blue economy. Of course, we have the Victoria Nile Basin project. That is, again, another darling that we've picked on, at least from this part, funded by different players and even in the region, and Uganda is part of it. We were worried about whatever happens to Lake Victoria and water going down by 5% could really distort the pace of some of this development that we've embarked on. What are we doing in terms of buffers? Because we also know our inflation is almost entirely drought determined at the point when we anticipate it different times of the year.
Well, we need to protect the catchment area of Victoria. Here in Uganda, we are launching a campaign of restoring the wetlands so that they filter what comes in the lake. And I'm sure we shall discuss with our neighbors to do the same. Otherwise, the amount of the water in Lake Victoria went up by 3 meters in 1964. And I don't think it has gone below that. Because in 1964, Victoria went up by 3 meters, and up to now, those 3 meters are there. In fact, the other season, we almost hit the record again when the measurements at Entebbe were at 12.67 meters. It was almost approaching the record of 1964. Which was 13.7 meters. 60% of the rain comes from the oceans. 40% comes from the local water bodies. That's why we are insisting on restoring the wetlands. If we do that, I'm sure if we do it in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Burundi, in Kenya, barring global warming, whose impact I don't know, I'm sure we shall manage.
All right, fantastic. Now, at the top end, we talked about the issue on South Sudan. Now, Uganda's role in it has been very commendable, but let's track back a bit. In 1957, during what happened in Rwanda, Uganda was open. 1994, again, Uganda was open. 2017, last month, from South Sudan alone, we saw 1 million displaced and refugees. Again, borders here were open. Now, this has moved on to the people who came from across South Sudan not being confined to IDPs, but now they can even own land and go to school, which is commendable again. But there is the issue on the tentative pinch that the country could feel. There's the money that was being asked to be raised to go to this particular point, 2 billion, that was only a third of it was raised here in the country. Just help us understand where we are with that conversation.
Well, the fundraising was to look after refugees when they're in Uganda. But the real solution should be for them to go back to their country. That one we are handling by having peace talks between the government of South Sudan and the other factions. We hope it will work out. If it works out, then the first option is for them to go back to their country. But if they stay here, it's all right. We shall. What they need is initially money for food, then schools, then health centers, then water supply, then electricity. And I think the money they raised, which was like 300 and something, was a good start. We shall continue fundraising.
What about the alternative in terms of the army? Of course, Uganda's army has been lauded as the best in the region. The quid pro quo where we have the army now in South Sudan, what kind of, are there any other conversations that are happening along that end to probably have a more solidified base or probably deployment, a lot more deployment on that end? Or do we...
Our army is in South Sudan.
Do we anticipate that there should be any conversations around that?
No. We are not... the only idea of our army going to South Sudan was about some economic projects. When they are being implemented, we can go to guard those projects. The ones in which Uganda is involved bilaterally with the South Sudan. That's all.
All right, fantastic. Let's move on to matters more on infrastructure. You're going the direction of massive infrastructure budgets. We have LAPSET, the Kampala-Entebbe Express Highway, the bypass refinery, of course, money to the millions, tens of millions of dollars, and we've talked about the power plants as well. Now, at a time when Uganda's debt is growing by almost 2 percentage points each financial year, when should we start worrying about the debt a lot more deliberately?
There's no worry about the debt, because the debt, even after we have borrowed for the railway and for the dams, it will be about 38% of GDP. This is way below the 50%, which is the danger zone. So there's no problem. And we're not going to go beyond that, because we only borrow for the strategic. We don't borrow for anything else.
Of course, there's a conversation as well. When we talked about the SGR, we were trying to analyze it from a regional point of view, where we say that we'd probably just like to hear your thoughts on this. Building a railway to import when we are not net exporters, would it make more sense probably having a superhighway from Malaba to Kampala than a railway where a wagon comes full and when it goes back, it doesn't go as full as it came in? Just help us understand the rationale behind this.
Well, first of all, if the imports are cheap, they also affect the production locally, because some of those imports are raw materials. So if they come in cheaper, it is good for the economy. But even for the consumers, when what they buy is cheaper, then they also benefit. But there's no reason why we should not export. There's no reason why we should not export much more, because now we are under-exporting. So there is a big potential for exporting, not only exporting, but exporting processed products, like coffee, like processed. And those high costs of transport are part of the impediments of attracting investments for export-oriented items, because the costs of transport are high. So when you lower them, you stimulate, yes, imports, that's what you are saying, but you also stimulate exports. It's good for both.
Right. A little earlier we were talking about the manufacturing sector, of course, tied into that point on exportation as well. The manufacturing sector was arguably slowing down Uganda's growth, because they contributed 7 to 10% of the country's growth, but they went about 4.2% to 2.8% down. So this looked like a bit of a contradiction, but we'd like to understand, is it a policy level issue or is it an investment participation issue in terms of the manufacturing sector?
What I know and what we are working for is enough and cheap electricity. This will attract more investments in manufacturing. So that's why we are targeting. But if it is slowing down, it must be because of not resolving the issue of high costs of production, which are high cost of electricity, high cost of transport, high cost of money. These are the ones which push up the costs and therefore undermine the profitability of the investors and therefore discourage investors from coming in as much as they should. And that's what we are tackling. We are tackling all of them, the three. High cost of transport, high cost of electricity, high cost of money for manufacturing. We have already tackled the problem of the high cost of telephones. That one we have tackled by building the ICT backbone.
I was anticipating probably at some point you'd have mentioned Bubu, the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda as well. Of course, this has been something that the Bank of Uganda has criticized at some point, saying it was protectionist or trying to segment the market, at least internally. What are your thoughts on this?
No, we cannot have discrimination within the East African products. No. Those are one market. So Buy Uganda doesn't affect the East African products. East African products are like Ugandan products. That's what we mean by a common market. A common market means one market. So the protection is against the goods coming from outside East Africa.
Okay, feeding the entire region. Now, let's move on now to the investor part, because they have been crucial and we need to understand whether they're being welcomed as fairly. Uganda has been giving a lot of tax incentives to investors, but we are wondering whether this is justified or creating as many jobs. Now, about 14 trillion Ugandan shillings is what is estimated to have been lost or at least sacrificed in terms of tax incentives to attract investors. This is the budget of something such as the Mulago Referral Hospital, for example, which is a comparison that is completely off base. But what is foregone? What is the trade-off between? What is the trade-off when you're giving this many incentives?
Those are poor strategies. What Africa needs, forget about Uganda alone, the whole of Africa needs to create jobs. You create jobs. And how do you create jobs? There are 4 sectors where jobs are found. Number 1, agriculture. If you commercialize it, it will create jobs. Number 2, manufacturing industries. Number 3, services. Number 4, ICT. These are the 4 sectors where you can create jobs, produce products which you sell, or produce services which you also sell. So when we lower taxes, or even scrap taxes, direct taxes, because we are not stopping all taxes. We are stopping direct taxes. If a factory comes here, even if it is not taxed for 10 years, it will produce products. It will produce this glass, which was not there before, and produce it here. So it will save imports. Or it will even create exports. Secondly, it will consume electricity, which is local. Water, telephones. It will create jobs. Yes, you have not got direct taxes, but you have addressed about 6 or so items, the ones I've mentioned. Electricity, water, telephones, jobs, the use of local raw materials, and that is all money which is going to those input providers. Does it mean that we shall not get taxes? No, we shall get taxes. Because you Ugandans, and even the Kenyans like you, as soon as he gets money in the pocket, the next thing he does is to go to the bar to drink alcohol. So there's a tax in every bottle of beer. So we are going to get more taxes, but in a smart way. Not direct, but indirectly. We are not foregoing taxes. We are just looking for a smarter way of how to get taxes, but also create jobs and increase production and so on.
Now, you've talked about the EAC, the Common Market Protocol, so we understand that there could be some cross-cutting in terms of the measures that are implemented with tax with the different countries in the region. Now, in Rwanda, for example, we're seeing the tax base at least going mostly to the micro players. The macro players is what I was asking. They get a lot of tax incentives and tax breaks. So are there any conversations that are being shared in terms of how you should handle tax across the board?
They should be shared. They should be shared because it is clear those who unwisely insist on taxes stagnate. If you take the example of Ireland was able to grow very fast because of low taxes. You fellows, you are fond of going to Dubai. I hear you are all Dubaiists. I only went to Dubai once in my life. Dubai is a center of no taxes. Those are people who have built a very, very strong economy in the sand using the strategy of no taxes. So I don't know how anybody can be blind to think that stopping the cows coming home is a good strategy instead of allowing the cows to come home so that you milk. How can you milk some if the cow has not come home, if it is in the bush? What will you tax if these people don't come? If the investors don't come? Why don't you let them come? And then you see how you tax what they produce or people who work for them. Yes.
Why?
Because if you scare away investments because of taxes, you will have nobody to tax, or few people to tax.
Well noted. Let's move on to another point. You mentioned the fourth sector, ICT. During the last Transform Africa, which we saw a lot of representation as well from Uganda, there was a repeated phrase, digital colonialism, where we see as much as we put in investment in Africa or African countries, 90% of profits from the applications here go to companies in USA, Europe and Asia. What do we make of the investments that are now being made in the region? We know particularly 15 billion Ugandan shillings going to innovation villages and cities in the country here.
No, the investments in ICT are to do with what they call BPOs, business processing outsourcing. This is where somebody in the US needs a service which the Ugandans provide to him from here. That's what the investment is for. It is for BPOs. So it's an export. BPOs are exports. You export a service.
That way we retain most of the revenue.
Yes, because it will be our people doing the professional work and then be paying for it here. It is true that the utility companies like the telephones, they are quite a bit of money is going out, but if we tax them properly, I think the problem is that they avoid the tax. They under-declare, but we are solving the issue of technology to find out who's telling lies. If they were paying their taxes, that will be part of win-win.
Now, still on ICT, we've tried to understand the rationale for different premiers and heads of state in the region in involvement in particular ICT investments, one of which has been fiber. Uganda has taken it up as the backbone, and they've laid most of the fiber in the country. But where now does the private sector come in? Some who would want to do that part of the job say the government has already picked that as its responsibility. At what point in the chain do we open up the door to such private opportunities?
Well, the government investments in infrastructure are good because they are not so much motivated by high profits. They are motivated by providing a base. So that's where when government invests in electricity or fiber, the backbone like that one, it's good for the economy because the government is not looking for high profits. The private sector, unless we agree, like in the case of electricity, you build a dam, but when you produce electricity, we shall buy it at so much cents, so that it doesn't overprice. And that overpricing will go into the whole economy and undermine our competitiveness. If it is sectors, if for instance it is a toll road, a road for collecting toll fees, as long as my Kabwera unawajua? Kabwera ni watu wa kawaida, the wananchi. As long as my wananchi have their free road, where they can pass with their matoke, with their cuckoos and all those, and pigs. Now the rich ones can voluntarily go on the toll road and they pay. I have no problem with that, because it doesn't affect the economy. It only affects those who want to pay, who can afford. But when you have issues like electricity, like the telephone, the cost of telephones, it's good that either the government invests, or if the private people invest, you agree on the price of the product, so that it does not distort the cost of production in the economy.
We've mentioned about these investments and, of course, infrastructure, and one key player across the globe that has stood out has been China. At what point do we draw a line in terms of involvement from Chinese investors? They've had a heavy hand and it doesn't come cheap. We anticipate a lot of conversations happening once they set base that goes decades. At what point do we draw the line in Uganda?
But why should we draw the line? The Chinese, what is crucial is for us to be clear about what is good for the country. If a Chinese company wants to invest in hydropower, what is crucial is that we ensure the quality is good and that the price of the product is affordable, and we put it in the contract. If he doesn't fulfill it, then we penalize him. So it is our own negotiating people who should be looked at, rather than those Chinese are coming in to help. When I studied economics long ago, there were the 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now you find the Chinese come in with 2, with capital and entrepreneurship. And they find dormant land. Land means natural resources. And dormant labor. And they activate them to be productive. So why would you worry about them? let our people negotiate with the details so that it is a good deal.
All right. Still on the same, of course, there's an issue now on the currency, and you've watched this over the last couple of years. Uganda and South Africa, according to the International Monetary Fund, the outlook for April this year, they're the only two countries that are running free float 100%, not like other countries that see depreciation eating in and when maybe we pump in money when there's an issue. Now, policy instruments, yes, are proper, but they're not the best intervention for most markets. Why does it work for Uganda particularly?
Well, and it will work more because we believe that because like you came in this room freely, I didn't force you. If you want to go out, you can go out anytime. So, which is more comfortable for you. If you enter and I say, now that you have entered, you will not go out without my permission. I don't know that will be good for me, first of all, that people come to see me, they do so at some risk. That once they are here, I turn them into semi-prisoners. So that's what we think about the economy. The economy, people should come and go if they are not happy. And I think that one is good for the economy. If they maintain it, more people will come because they know that I will go. If it's not safe, I get out with my money. I don't have to. That's why we allow them to open external accounts. Yes.
Let's touch on bits on with all of this that we're talking about. Of course, we have to know about administration and implementation. One of the biggest issues that has been plaguing us on
and by the nature of our economy, now that you see now Uganda is going to grow very fast now because we have what we did not have in the past. We have electricity, we have better roads, we are working on the railway, we have already worked on the backbone of ICT. So this is the time for Uganda, apart from security, which we have always had, security and so on, and macroeconomic stability. So now that we have these cost deflators, these ones which will lower the costs, Uganda is going to grow very fast. You will see.
Right. You mentioned the matter on security. Let's go to a bit of an uncomfortable issue that has been raised. There have been some unexplained murders in the country. I'm sure have reached your office a lot more than once. Your candidature in government has been praised as having security as your biggest weapon. So when we have these killings and unexplained murders, we can't understand how one of the biggest achievements of the country is at stake and not being answered promptly.
It will be answered, but these are different. These are crime. What we originally started off with was fighting terrorism. Terrorism is open challenge to the constitutional order, where somebody says, I want to change the system through weapons, but using not conventional war, but using terrorism. And terrorism means indiscriminate violence. Now, all those terrorists have been defeated. There's nobody who can threaten Uganda to use, by using rural terrorism. And even urban terrorism is not easy. But in recent months, we have had this crime, killing some women who are coming from work. There was targeting of the sheikhs. The sheikhs had some element of terrorism in it. But we have geared up to invest because to defeat rural terrorism, we developed the army in a special way. Now we are focusing on these mainly urban-based crime. We are going to defeat it.
Let's shift gears slightly. Another issue has been corruption. One of the biggest issues globally, not even on the African continent. And your answer to it, at least one that you mentioned, was that you would push army generals to join government initiatives. How do they handle execution of rolling out of your projects when that is not essentially the initial docket?
No, the soldiers, we have got very many soldiers. Much of this work is just honesty. You don't have to be, it's not highly technical. If I give you this glass, please take it for me to Kampala. You don't need to be an economist or to take it and deliver it. That's all, just trust. So you can get a priest who has been preaching the word of the Lord in the church, and you said, Padre, please take this glass for me and give it to Ndirangu in Kampala. And he will take it. It's not specialized, it's not being a doctor to operate a patient. So much of the work is just trust, integrity. So regardless of what you wear, whether you were a priest, you were a soldier, you were even a villager.
Still a bit shaky on that because it's a recurrent topic with no clear indication on the progress. But still tied to that has been the issue on bloated administration expenses, which you wrote a memo against, questioning the creation of agencies such as Uganda National Roads Society, National Environment Management Authority. But then again, we had duplication of roles, and there was the issue also on Parliament where we saw the creation of districts now coming into 3 MPs, 450 MPs across the country. We're seeing a lot of contradiction in terms of what is being said about cutting the budget and what is the reality on ground.
The increasing administrative units or electoral units are part of our liberation process. In the olden days, you would have, for instance, districts which were populated by different ethnic groups. For instance, Bundubujo, you have 2 groups there. Now, when we had only one constituency, we found that because people are still voting on a sectarian basis, there was the tyranny of numbers. One group which was more numerous than the other one was always sending elected people. So we had to sort that one out to say, no, okay, if this is of course, it is wrong to vote on sectarian basis, which they should stop. But if it is still happening, why not separate these people? Because it will create enmity. So we said, okay, if you are still following identity in terms of selecting leaders, okay, you have your constituency, let them have their constituency. So some of those issues are really liberatory, part of our liberation, because we don't want any Ugandan to be oppressed by another one. But so that's not a wastage. When you hear all these boards, what business are they doing? Do you need a board on how to spend money? Because that's what they do. They have boards for spending money. Boards in capitalism are for generating money, not for spending. No. The boards were for generating money so that they can do it efficiently. So it was a mix-up. It should be sorted out. It was a mistake.
All right, for the interest of time, we'd just like to move now to the tail end of the conversation. You mentioned something about voting, which ties into a key demographic in the country, that is the youth. Uganda among a top 10 fastest growing population in the world, and we saw the numbers come out when, during the last election process. We anticipate 100 million jobs to be created realistically on the African continent, but between now and then, Uganda is no exception. We have to see a lot more deliberate initiatives for the youth. On that end, how deliberate is that from your perspective?
First, we had to deal with the basics. As I told you, the sectors are four: agriculture, industry, services, and ICT. So we need to attract more actors in these sectors. But for them to be attracted, they needed low cost of electricity, low cost of transport, low cost of telephones, and maybe a low cost of money, so that I can easily start a factory, apart in addition to other things like corruption and so on, so that I can be able to start a factory and create jobs. That's what we have done. And if you see, factories are mushrooming now. If you go along Mkono Road, you find new factories. You go Gulu Road, they are mushrooming. And yet we have not finished solving the issue of the price of electricity, because Bujagari is still having a high high cost of electricity, which we need to solve. So the jobs will be created by the investments, and you attract those investments by lowering the cost.
Okay. You mentioned actors. Any of these actors, could we see some of them as political actors?
No. I'm talking about economic actors, not political.
The reason why I'm asking that is because during the last election, we saw someone such as Bobby Wine, for example, amass large crowds of the youth, particularly, who were trying to push again the agenda of the youth. So what comes to mind when you hear such a name and the crowds that he amasses?
That's no problem. That is because if the youth are not yet, their issue is not solved, they can think that there is a solution by another youth. But what I wrote I wrote an article, and I told you that this is not biology, this is ideology. Right. So whether you are a youth or whatever you are, you must get the diagnosis and the prescription, because you will not create a job by simply being a youth. You create jobs by doing ABC. So what are those younger people proposing to do, which the government is not doing? But simply say, I am youth like you, therefore I will solve your problem even if I have no plan which I have indicated, which is different from what the government is doing. Those are just temporary diversions. They will come back to the real issue.
Right. All right. Let's move on to another matter. At the back of all these conversations that we're having, we have the regulation perspective. One of this, it came to question when we saw the much contested conversation about Crane Bank. Of course, depositors' money, Bank of Uganda speaking about 250 billion of depositors' money getting lost in Crane Bank, and the person behind that was a name that has been so frequent even outside the border, that is Sudhir, the property mogul. Now, this man, for example, he had no flags that had been raised by the central bank or earlier on, but we saw a lot of conversation happening around some irregularities with how he conducted business. Now, if we have the central bank not saying anything for such a long time, and a lot of money is amassed and a lot of jobs are created, and then all of a sudden we wake up one morning and there's news about irregularities, what kind of a message are we trying to work around to ensure that regulation is handled at the core?
Well, I don't want to go in that matter because it is in the court. So we shall hear their reasons.
But let's talk about the policy or the regulation bit, ensuring that it's tightened, not to have instances such as that.
Well, but that's what will come out in the court. That's what will come out. Somebody will say, Sudi will say, I was persecuted. There was no good reason why this was done. And the other people will say, no, they will bring their reasons. So I don't want to go into that one because it is in the court.
All right, let's shift that. I have two last questions. Number one, you're a healthy guy. We've seen you walk around, and we've seen you in different countries. Just help us understand what your regimen is, because we anticipate after a few years we'll be having another conversation such as this. What keeps you so energetic?
Because I'm disciplined. I'm not. I don't drink alcohol. I don't squander my life. So I am fit because I used to exercise. These days I don't exercise so much. But even if you don't exercise, even the diet also affects how your body is. What you eat. I don't eat your European foods and Asian foods. I don't eat rice. I don't know why you eat rice, you Africans.
But it was served down here when we had lunch.
Because they know you are confused, so I say you cook for the consumption.
All right. Right.
I don't eat bread.
Right.
I eat kalo, millet.
Right.
I eat African foods.
My final question has to do with...
African foods are more nutritious than these European foods and Asian foods which you eat. They are more nutritious. They are healthier.
All right. My final question.
And you should eat them at the right time also. Because if you eat late in the night, it's very dangerous, because then you sleep with the calories in your body. If you eat supper, the good meal is breakfast. That's the one that the body needs. Lunch, not so much.
Right.
Supper, totally unnecessary, except to keep the intestines from, it shouldn't be empty, because also you can get ulcers and so on. But you should eat something small and early. Drinking alcohol is also another problem.
That's an X. Right.
I don't know why people drink alcohol. They really, I think it is because they are not mission oriented. Because if you are mission oriented, if I want to achieve a mission, why should I weaken myself so that I don't achieve the mission? I don't have the energy to achieve the mission. It must have something to do with the not being mission oriented.
All right. My final question has to do with what keeps you up at night. I would like to know what kind of concerns you have when you go to bed and you're thinking probably what your legacy will be, or what you anticipate conversations are happening in Uganda in terms of either maintaining your legacy past 2021, or what kind of person you would want to fill your shoes in the event that you pass the baton at that particular point, or Uganda self-sustaining itself without foreign aid or weaning off of aid. What kind of issues keep you up at night?
Well, there are no issues which keep me from sleeping, because I sleep very well. But I think the one big issue of Africa, of you people, if you knew what you are doing, would be a strategic insurance for Africa. You know, because you are not concentrating on political integration. You have the 53 countries of Africa, which you are now worshipping. Uganda, Kenya, like that. And you but these countries, none of them can guarantee the safety of Africa. None of them is strong enough to guarantee the future of Africa. You don't have a United States of Africa, which guarantees the Western countries, which protects the Western countries. You don't have a China, you don't have an India, you don't have a Russia. I hear these days you are busy with the European football clubs. I don't know which one has got more goals or what have you. But I thought you should be worried about your future. Who is there to guarantee the freedom of the black man? Uganda, even when Uganda becomes a developed country, cannot do that. It's small. South Korea, you can look at South Korea. South Korea now is one of the most developed countries in the world. But when it comes to security issues, you see it behind America, behind Japan. So, where is the center of gravity of Africa's strategic security? I don't hear you talking about that. You have got all these radios where you burn a lot of electricity, talking about all sorts of small things. But how about the strategic safety of Africa? The destiny, ensuring the destiny of African people. Because like when we fought colonialism, we had to rely on the support of the socialist countries. China, Russia, they supported us. But they can't go on supporting us all the time. They are now busy also with their own things. So, where is your strategic? That's what you should do. That's one concern I have. I said, but these people, these Ndirangus and all these people, they are busy with football clubs in Europe, but they don't talk about their future. That's my big issue, which you should do. Okay. About Uganda has no problem at all, because the issues of Uganda were resolved in 1994, when we had the Constituent Assembly. The Constitution was written, it is there. So there's no problem at all for that one. Can't worry, because that one was finished. Everything is there. If you want to do this, you do this. Everything is provided for. So it's a matter of choice. So that one is not a problem. But the other one is not even addressed. The issue of the strategic security for Africa is not even addressed. Nobody is even talking about it. So why worry about something which is very clearly captured? There is a constitution. This is how you do. When the president dies, if he dies today, the vice president takes over, then everything is provided for. Why do you worry about what is addressed and finished? And you don't talk about this, something which is so crucial but not addressed at all. You have NTV talking about all sorts of irrelevant issues on the world and telling all sorts of lies. But none of them is talking about the future of Africa. Who will stand against the invaders who invaded Africa in the past? Who? I don't see you talking about that. And you talk of the young people should be talking about that. Because for us, when we were young people, we talked about those issues. We talked about liberation. We talked about democracy. We talked about Pan-Africanism. But you are talking about all irrelevant things except the crucial ones for our future.
Mr. President, I really can't thank you enough for creating time to speak to us. I really do appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. His Excellency the President of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, just guiding us through what works, challenges, and of course a lot of the low-hanging fruits and opportunities which we'll be taking advantage of here in Uganda, of course stewarding the region and the conversations that ripple across the world. Many thanks for watching. As always, that's been our exclusive here at CNBC Africa, first in business worldwide. Thank you very much for watching.